Hello, my fellow well dwellers. Welcome to another well dweller moment. I'm Eric Freiberger, coming to you from Treaty 7 lands, Calgary, Alberta. Today, I want to take a few minutes to talk to you a bit about how everyone has a prophetic imagination, and to ask the question, where does yours lead you? So it was several years ago that I had the opportunity and chance to gather with a group of other fellow students in a living room. I was there virtually, they were there in person, and we were there kind of gleaning the wisdom and thoughts from a gentleman named Dr. Richard Beck. He was kind of probing us and asking us questions about our ideas behind hospitality and the church. And at some point, Beck had turned to me, as he knew I was the sole house church leader and leader within a house church movement. And he asks me, how do you discern and respond to heresy in your church? Now, at the time, I wasn't quite prepared for the question, and I fumbled the best answer that I could give him in that moment. But that experience seems to have always remained in my memories as I recall it often, including when I heard an answer to the same question brought to Dr. Jörg Rieger in a class I recently was taking part in online. Building on a theological truth that religion can be found in all things, traditions, economics, family life, politics, social systems, etc., Rieger says that the definition of heresy can be articulated both to the individual and the community through the explorative balance between two particular questions. What brings life into the world? And what brings death into the world? Is this answer problematic because the definition of heresy lies within two subjective inquisitions? Maybe. But historically, when the definition of heresy's meaning has been kept within an institutional objectivity, it has often led into oppressive, prejudicial corruption and harmful injustices. Perhaps the meaning of heresy was always meant to be kept within a human, relationally organic and subjectivity to the pursuit of justice and creational well-being. Okay, yes, I get it. Now that is truly a huge mouthful. To maybe try and bring some practicality in working out heresy and the pursuit of just meaning in our lives, God does instill a sense of prophetic into each one of us, though. We see that in the whole APEST model of Ephesians 4, verse 11, where we're given the apostolic, the prophetic, the evangelistic, the shepherd, the teacher gifts, and each of them instilled in us in different patterns and ways. In a sense, everyone has a prophetic imagination to grow in tune with and shape the world around them. Unlike the false assumption that prophecy is about foretelling the future, a proper understanding to the prophetic imagination, as articulated by Walter Brueggemann, is that it is meant to nurture, nourish, and evoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. In a simpler expression shared by Krista Tippett in an article I read, she says, the prophetic imagination helps us connect the dots between the world as it is and the world as it might be. It also tends to emerge in moments of chaos and change. What are some of the practical ways we then can learn and grow with our prophetic imaginations? Well, to start, perhaps we can begin to allow it to weave a visualization and articulation of God's or the divine's desire for our reality. In a deeper sense within ourselves, we can envision a world that is significantly better than the one we are in now. This imagination begins to build a vocabulary and sometimes poetic language within us that articulates the hopes and dreams of higher society and well-being for all in equity and equality. Sometimes this breaks out in our reality like it did with Martin Luther King's speech when he cried out almost with a spontaneity, saying, "I have a dream." Another way we might begin to practice the prophetic imagination is to provide spaces and time for lament and processing grief. It is courageously being a voice crying out from the marginalized wilderness, saying, "We must seek forgiveness and redemption." How might this practice give life to the world today? We might ask ourselves. When wounds have been created through unjust actions and oppressive historical events, real healing cannot truly be experienced without the willingness to grieve such experiences and seek their acknowledgement. Events such as the apartheid of South Africa, the Rwandan genocide of the Tutsis, the colonization of the Americas, the slavery and racism of blacks and the BIPOC populations, and the long historical narratives to the oppression of indigenous people, both in North America and across the globe, have left a weight that leaves deep systemic roots in our society and our lives. I don't think we need to necessarily just see these events and wounds solely in grand accounts, though, either. Each of us personally has experienced grief and suffering differently. These too need to be processed and allowed space for healing. We must learn to speak these stories, both personally and corporately, in open confession, before learning to share together in a new story of reconciliation and social transformation. The prophetic imagination can also practically reveal pathways of mercy and empathy for the oppressed and marginalized. In some ways, these are the natural next steps forward from grievance and lament. It gives recognition to healing having taken place and allowing new sinews to connect humanity to a potential earlier dreamed of. Several years ago, I was deeply inspired by Reverend Desmond Tutu's recollections of the formation and events around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He describes a South African understanding of Ubuntu. While difficult to translate it into the English language, he describes it as, "My humanity is caught up, is inextricably bound up in yours. We belong in a bundle of life. We say a person is a person through other persons. It is not I think, therefore I am. It says rather, I am human because I belong. I participate. I share. A person with Ubuntu is open and available to others, affirming of others, does not feel threatened that others are able and good, for he or she has a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that he or she belongs in a greater whole and is diminished when others are humiliated or diminished, when others are tortured or oppressed or treated as if they were less than who they are." When our prophetic imaginations instill a practice of mercy and empathy for others, hospitality no longer is seen as simply a gift for the guest. Rather, they are pathways of our nature to embrace all others in creation as belonging members within our family, flesh of our flesh, blood of our blood. The communion given by Jesus, poured out for many through our very own bodies. Perhaps one more way I might share with you in growing closer with our prophetic imagination today is to say that it most often uh, is disruptive yet hopeful. The practices of living out a prophetic life is meant to be transformative in our very core beings and linked always with our actions beyond just the verbal protest to our discomforts in the world of today. It can be easy to stop short of responding to our prophetic imaginations by simply verbalizing the need to change, for change in our world or reality, while leaving the actual work experience for that of future generations. Patience for personal and Patience for personal and social change is only a healthy response until it begins to slip back into normative patterns. Prophetic movements are meant to keep us on our toes, disruptive and yet pushing us forward to a hopeful renewal in our reality. Viktor Frankl knew this, and in an almost eternal tension, when he expressed and said that then, as now, freedom and powerlessness, the collective and the individual, the external and the internal, stood in direct, sometimes irreconcilable opposition to one another. The crises of our time are immense. Even so, it seems important that we keep our dignity and that we remain defiant and stubborn, that we say yes in spite of everything and take responsibility. Okay, so we have really dug deep here into the practices of our prophetic imagination. But in honesty, we've only barely scratched the surfaces of what it might look like for you personally. How might these practices look within your own life? Events that have shaped you, understandings of who you are, and the personal relationships that you form. How do they speak to the places you live in, the social scenes you are a part of, the organizations you've committed to, the neighborhood you are rooted in? How do they interact with the beliefs you have about God and the divine, the values and virtues that you cherish, the principles you hold highest about the world? Where does your prophetic imagination lead you? So perhaps one way that I can share with you and how the prophetic imagination leads me in a very exciting kind of way is personally my desire to see good news brought to and lived out by the many disabled people of my community. That conversation, by the way, is not just limited to those who are considered disabled. Remember Ubuntu. We are inextricably bound up with one another, no matter our abilities. I think personally of people who are leaders in our community, pastors, and and, and neighbors of those who find themselves connected to disabled people who live on their block. 1 in 6, maybe even 5 people in our world today in Canada are considered disabled. Each of us finds a distinct relationship and involvement and inextricably being bound up with those who are disabled. For this reason, let me extend an invitation to you to join me and others in an upcoming event we are calling the Good News Event. Gathering both in person and online, we are hosting a conversation in the hopes of reigniting the prophetic imagination in being good news for and as disabled people today. So in the show notes of today's Well Dweller Moments is a poster with QR links to where you can register to be either in person at Ambrose University on April 12th from 2 to 4 p.m. to take part in the conversation, or online where it'll be streamed live, and we will have hosts and those who can engage you there to be part of of the gathering and our conversation. I hope you're able to join me that day, and that together we might change the world for disabled people today. So as I close, let me just share with you a kind of a poetic benediction from Dr. Bruce Epperly. May the energy of love flow in and through you. May your hands radiate healing energy. May your heart beat with compassion. May your mind bring forth beautiful thoughts and words. May your spirit unite with spirit to heal the earth. And may you claim your vocation in an unending adventure of companionship with God in creating a universe where love abounds, thought excites, playfulness energizes, and adventure inspires. How can we keep from singing? Amen. Thanks for listening to my Well Dweller moment today. Please do subscribe to the podcast through the links below this video, and visit at thebottomofthewell.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter and receive future postings, both of writing and of future podcast episodes and conversations I have. Always a pleasure to share with you. I pray you have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll catch you next time on Well Dweller Podcast.